Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are checking out a video that frankly is completely appropriate for me to do. This is the top 5 spiciest war crimes committed in Warhammer 40k by Majorkill. I am just so curious to see what he has as his top 5. So let's get into it.
Gal, Warhammer 40k is synonymous with war crimes. To be fair, half of all fictional settings unintentionally display war crimes as well, but 40k really takes the cake with this one. Like, read over the International Criminals Courts of 2002, and you will be able to think of an in-law moment when the Imperium of Man committed one or more of those crimes at once. The only one they don't get done for is attacking the UN peacekeepers, purely by the virtue of there being no UN in space.
That's a good point. I didn't realize that actually was its own category of war crime.
Oh shit. Just so we're on the same page for this, a war crime includes willfully causing excessive suffering or death in war, torture, destroying shit unnecessarily, forcing prisoners of war to fight for you, not holding fair trials for prisoners of war, imprisoning civilians in occupied areas, taking hostages, attacking civilians, attacking the UN, killing prisoners, pretending to call a truce, settling in occupied territory, removing people from their homes in occupied areas, Israel, using poison.
Wait, is Majorkill actually doing a well-researched video? Did I just get bamboozled?
Weapons, using civilian shields, using child soldiers, and attacking unarmed medics. So yeah, as long as you don't do anything of the above, you should be able to avoid international court. Or, you know, just be allied to Russia or America. That seems to have the same effect. Before we get started, what is the number one thing that over 98% of you value most in your life? That's right, your testicles. They are
yeah, we don't need
toiletries bag for helping to fight the spiciest war crimes we've seen in 40k.
Yeah, no. If that company wants to have their ads run in my video, they can pay me. Majorkill already got his ad revenue. I'm not going to support it secondarily.
Ranging from the use of child soldiers to attacking civilians, all the way to blowing up entire planets. Now that last one isn't on the 2002 International Criminal Court ruling, but there's definitely some overlap with a couple others on the list. Everyone loves a good war crime.
I assume that indiscriminately destroying an entire city would count, and if you exterminatus a planet, by default you've exterminatus all the cities on that planet, so you're probably right there. But I don't know, I'm used to, like, every time Majorkill throws me off, I'm fully prepared to roast him, but he did his homework. I'm shocked.
Especially when they're spicy. Let's get into it. The Imperium of Mankind commits war crimes like I mispronounce names, so whilst there is a lot of fun to be had looking for them in the lore, I have retrieved some of the spiciest for your viewing today. Starting us off with number 5, we have the Inquisition committing war crimes against the Space Wolves. During the months of shame, when the Inquisition were being massive dicks to their war veterans and the Space Wolves moved in to protect said veterans, the Inquisition committed a war crime. Well, you know, they committed like 10, but this one was the most interesting. They baited the Space Wolves into firing range by saying they wanted to talk about a truce. Once in firing range, the Inquisition attacked the Space Wolves' fleet. This violates the war crime of misusing a flag of truce.
Oh, interesting. This is interesting that he's going for some more technical ones instead of just, or maybe he's like starting at the bottom. But that's kind of messed up. But it's also interesting because this is a fight between like almost like a civil war, right? And things get really a lot messier when you have war crimes between two parts of a nation, right? So here's what I mean. Like the classic one, we weren't allowed to use any sort of chemical irritant in Afghanistan. Weren't even allowed to carry it. Because technically, using chemical irritants like tear gas or pepper spray are war crimes, right? They're chemical weapons that, you're not allowed to deploy chemical weapons, full stop. But in the United States, we actually lean pretty heavily on those as less lethal options that law enforcement and security forces can go to before having to turn to like lethal options or like beating the shit out of protesters. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But so things are complicated. What if you had a sort of, if you were in another country and there was like an armed group like the FARC in Colombia, for example? The FARC in Colombia would tell you that they are a breakaway faction that wants to like establish their own government. I know the FARC doesn't exist anymore, and they weren't quite like that. But for their purposes, they would say, no, we're an independence movement. We should be recognized as our own state, and the things that the Colombian government does to us constitute war crimes. But the Colombian government says, no, this is a law enforcement action. This is internal to our country. This is not a war. And so these rules don't apply. And similarly, if you were like an armed insurrectionist group in the United States and you told the FBI or whatever, you were like, oh, we want to talk truce. And the FBI was like, yeah, sure. And then they arrested you. That's not a war crime. That's just law enforcement operations internal to the country. So in fact, this may not technically be a war crime because it is the Imperium settling up a civil war or like an insurgency of sorts.
By pretending to look for a truce, then just using that to surprise attack, the Inquisition committed a war crime. Ooh. It's not all bad though. When his chapter was betrayed, Logan Grimnar teleported onto the Inquisitor's ship, found out who ordered the war crime, and promptly killed them. The Inquisition would go on to then commit further war crimes against the Space Wolves during this war, such as the bombing of Fenris, being unlawful wanton destruction of property, and the killing of billions of civilians to hide the truth about demons, violating the war crime of directing attacks against civilians. Fortunately, Space Wolves showed the Inquisition who was boss, and by the end of the war, every Inquisitor or Grey Knight who had ordered said war crimes were dead. On to number 4 now. We have the existence of super soldiers, such as Space Marines and Custodes, being a war crime. Now, it's not a war crime to augment your troops for war. I'm actually super stoked that it's not. I would love to see some super soldiers running around fucking shit up. But it's the way that the Imperium does it which makes it a no-no. The Imperium recruits as Custodes and Space Marines when they are children, which violates the war crime that says that using child soldiers is illegal. It doesn't matter if they only see combat when they get older. If you take children and train them to be soldiers, you are a war criminal. Now, unlike the Inquisition's war crimes, which are just unnecessary dick moves, the creation of child soldiers and the subsequent super soldiers we get from them are for the greater good. No, not the heretical greater good, like the saying, you know what I mean? Without Space Marines and the Emperor's favourite Golden Boys, humanity would be mega fucked, so this is one of the few times where war crimes are a huge vibe. As a cheeky side note, the Thunder Warriors existing did not constitute a war crime as they were modified when they were adults. The Thunder Warriors would go on to commit many a war crime, but that's beside the point. Down to number...
Okay, yeah, the prohibition on child soldiers is pretty strict. But that said, it's almost unenforceable. And this is, of course, because while formal militaries that are parties to the Geneva Convention obviously have to fall under this purview, you have a lot of armed groups that either don't care or don't account for the age of their fighters. And you see this a lot in groups like Hamas or Hezbollah. One of those two actively recruits teenagers into a lot of their militant wings. The Iraqi insurgency was famous for having teenagers that would take up arms and fight the U.S. Sometimes the insurgent groups would actually supposedly have even younger children act as scouts to report when, for example, a U.S. patrol had crossed under Bridge X. So they wouldn't be armed, but they were thrust into military operations in a way that is not acceptable under the Geneva Convention. The U.S., of course, also for a time, I believe they still do, will allow 17-year-olds with parents' permission to attend basic training. Usually these are kids who graduate high school but who have not yet quite turned 18, and usually they turn 18 within a few months of joining the service. And so this is seen as something that's like probably technically not allowed, but is just sort of overlooked because these under 18, usually they're not even soldiers, they're just starting their training, almost never see combat or even enter the operational force. Of course, the question is, would the same rule apply to the Astartes, right? And maybe Astartes say, hey, these kids are not technically in the chapter, right? They are just in the equivalent of the Boy Scouts, and because it's not a warfighting operation that they're a part of, then it's not really a war crime, right? And again, there is no court to make these determinations, but that is what, if you were like, Paul, you have to argue against children being turned into Astartes, that's what I would argue. I would say, no, this isn't the fighting wing of the Space Marine chapter. They're inducted into this version of the Boy Scouts if the Boy Scouts were to subject you to horrific body-altering surgeries and basically brainwash you.
Number 3 now, we have the creation of Servitors. Boy, oh boy, this violates some shit, with multiple war crimes being ticked off here. Before I list which war crimes this ruffles, let me just quickly explain a servitor. Basically, when you commit a crime, or you're a heretic, or you're an enemy of the Imperium of mankind, or you just look at the Inquisitor the wrong way, you will get lobotomized and filled with cruel and crude augments, hence turning you into a mechanical slave. The process is horrific. For war crimes, this invokes the torture or inhumane treatment crime, deprives a prisoner of war of a fair trial crime, and depending what kind of servitor you get turned into, could also violate the sexual slavery war crime. Most interestingly though, is the war crime of forcing prisoners of war to serve in forces of a hostile power. As many servitors are used in battle, and many servitors are taken from defeated enemies, this is a huge no-no. Being turned into a servitor would be arguably the worst thing that could happen to you, regardless of how many war crimes it commits. Some servitors are even allowed to maintain awareness and consciousness as extra punishment, with no control over their bodies. I think if anyone wants to understand the grim darkness of 40k, explain to them that the Imperium are supposed to be the good guys. Well, at least good when compared to space elf rapists, war fungus, literal hell, and space bugs of death. Yet the good guys of this setting happily employ the use of lobotomized slaves. Nice. Now on to number 2.
Okay, again, we run into this weird space where it's not this sounds ridiculous because it is. It's not a war crime if you do it to your own people. So it is not a war crime that North Korea has gulags full of political prisoners, even though you could not do that if it was, say, South Korean military members. I mean, this is the other problem with the war crimes, is if North Korea did it, who's going to bring them to justice? You going to invade? Is the South going to invade this nuclear-armed power to bring who to trial? A North Korean general? Yeah. This is the reality that we have to remember. And 40k definitely does a great job of reminding us of this, is that ultimately it's not what the law says, it's what you have the power to enforce. And there is no international super cops that are going to kidnap that North Korean general or whoever. And so, it's not a war crime if no one enforces it. And it's not a war crime if it's an internal act, right? And because being converted to a servitor, you have to be a human being to do it. And by definition, if you're a human being, you are a citizen of the Imperium. It may not be a war crime. It may just be seen as a cruel form of punishment. But again, are they enemy combatants? If I had to defend this, I would argue no. Again, this is the sort of like the slimy lawyer art move here, where you're just like, yeah, sure. The other side would have you believe that lobotomizing people and turning them into slaves is horrible and unacceptable. But technically, this court does not have jurisdiction, and therefore we are innocent of all charges, right? But I'm also not wrong. We've established this. Countries do far worse than this all of the time, and they're not war crimes because they're not committed in a war. Just like the Imperium would tell you, it is at war with orcs and Tau and Eldar and Necrons and Tyranids and, demons from hell, but it is not at war with itself.
We have the time that the Imperium deliberately infected a number of its worlds with gene stealers for a laugh. This one is more about crimes against humanity and less about war crimes, because there was technically not a war going on, at least not initially. But considering that crimes against humanity are considered even more severe than war crimes, I think it's pretty justified to feature here. Basically, the Imperium wanted to capture a female that was pregnant with a gene stealer for some likely gross reason, and for whatever other reason, they just couldn't do it in a lab. Or maybe they could and they're just severely retarded. Also, not sure why they had to do it over multiple planets. The gene stealers soon overwhelmed each planet, and each planet had to be exterminatus. I can't remember if they got their pregnant female or not, but yeah, probably not the most efficient tactic I've seen. On a similar vein to the Imperium has been known to exterminatus worlds that have been lost. Sometimes this is justified, like when a Tyranid Hive fleet has overrun it, or it's riddled with Nurgle's AIDS jizz. But they even do it when the Tau take over sometimes. And if the Tau are known for anything, it's improving each world they take over. So yeah, the Imperium being sore losers when the Tau kick their ass is a violation of unlawful wanton destruction or appropriation of property. Depends.
If you're the Imperium. So here's the thing, right? And this is actually an important tool to understand the real world, I think, is that we take our values and we superimpose them over different people's living different lives. And if you're the Imperium, right, you're 40,000 years into the future, this is like trying to apply this set of rules to like medieval warfare or like Bronze Age warfare, right? It wouldn't make any sense because the people are so different from us in so many ways that it's almost nonsense to create these rules. 40,000 years into the future, being a human being is inexorably linked, I would argue, if I were a scholar, is inexorably linked to the living in the Emperor's light, right? To worshiping the Emperor, bathing in the gaze of the Astronomicon, right? This is one and the same with being a human being, right? So when you get brainwashed by an alien race and you disavow the Emperor, you have disavowed being a person. And when you're not a person, you can't be the victim of a war crime. It's like saying it's a war crime to like graffiti a porta potty. It's not a thing. It can't be the victim of a crime, right? Maybe I steal something and the owner of that something is the victim of a crime, but you have to think like this religious fanatic. And in part and parcel to religious fanaticism is the belief, sincerely held, that your devotion to your religion is one and the same with being a person. It is achieving humanity and completeness. And to not have that religion, that religious belief, is to be less than human. This is how almost all religious violence is justified. This is how two sects in pick your favorite country, this is why they think they can kill each other wholesale, is because they have to believe that the other side is not fully human. This is how colonial powers from every country and every religion show up and can perpetrate these like horrific cruelties to the people they encounter of a different religion, where it's like convert or die. And literally they're like, become a fully fledged human being by our value system or die, because those two but because they're the same thing, right? You can't exist in the liminal space of being a non-human being, right? Obviously, in our value system, we find this unbelievably horrific. The idea that people who have different beliefs than you aren't fully human is disgusting and has led to all sorts of horrible stuff. But we can't go back in time or forward in time and change things, right? We can't rewrite the way these values operate, right? And so we just have to accept that this is how things were, and that we can be like better going forward, or in this case, I don't know, try not to turn the world into 40k, if we can. Anyway, I know this is like a weird, complicated rant, but it's one of those things that really bothers me when people do this, when people like reach way back into history and try to like be like, why didn't other people share my, highly specific cosmopolitan values that have only evolved in the past like 2 decades? And it's just like, what do you think people were like 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, right? Their culture and their worldview was totally different, and it's like almost impossible for us to comprehend it.
Warcrime. And finally, our number 1 spot. Everyone saw this one coming. Vulcan burning a defeated and defenseless Eldar child alive in cold blood. Very uncharacteristic of him. I reckon the writers only did this so Vulcan wasn't too nice for the setting. He needed something that people could be like, yeah, well, Vulcan murdered a child. Can't be too perfect. Whilst it seems like torching a defenseless child would really set off the war crime alert, there was actually only one crime committed here, as surprisingly, it doesn't come under attacking civilians, as the elder child was a combatant. However, it does come under killing a surrendered combatant, as the elder child had very clearly surrendered, before eating a mouthful of Vulcan's hot, throbbing Promethium. Funnily enough, you can
What the fuck was that?
Kill children without it being a war crime as long as they are a combatant. And for them to be a combatant, that means the other team would have to commit the war crime of using child soldiers. So you're actually the good guy in this situation.
See, Majorkill, again, this is sort of the weird, like, technicality bullshit that you have to deal with when you try to figure out if something's a war crime.
Using flame weapons is also not a war crime. However, using poisonous weapons is. The Salamanders actually refuse to use any kind of radioactive or poisonous weapons, as they generally avoid war crimes. Generally. What drove Vulcan to commit a war crime then? Well, not as much as you would think. The planet originally was raided by Dark Eldar, but then some normal Eldar came in, got rid of the Dark Eldar, and then started hanging out with the humans there. When Vulcan arrived, it was a paradise where Eldar and human lived in harmony. Curse joined Vulcan in the campaign and reaped a heavy toll. After massacring an entire city, the planet surrendered, and the survivors were herded into literal concentration camps. When the captured Eldar were like, fuck this, and tried to escape, the Night Lords opened fire into the crowd, killing a bunch of humans on both sides, including a friend of Vulcan. In a misdirected rage, Vulcan killed the last remaining Eldar, who was the child, despite the fact that it was Curse and his Night Lords that caused the incident. To be fair to Vulcan, he did feel pretty shit about it later, but yeah, a bit of a lapse in judgment on his behalf. Almost every faction in 40k commits war crimes, other than the Tau. Some factions are just a little bit spicier with their transgressions than others.
Okay, just want to point this out. The Tau do commit war crimes. If you brainwash, and that's the word I'm using because engaging in mind control of human beings is brainwashing them, right? Or if you want to think of it another way, think of it as making them into very good servitors, right? They don't have the complete free will that a human being intrinsically should have. The Tau show up and do this to people, and they force them, again, because we don't know if they get to make a free choice, they force them to fight. So yes, you're right. It's great that they feed them ramen and not their ground up colleagues. It's awesome. It's great that they get to like live in a house and stuff. But the question isn't, did you do other things that weren't war crimes? Because that's commendable, but is it a war crime to brainwash someone and force and against their own free will or overtake their own free will in order to force them to fight? That may be a war crime. So the Tau also do war crimes.
If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then Patreon is the place to be. Where only $1 per month give you access to a boatload of Warhammer hentai.
What the frick? Is that Chapter Master? No, I don't need this. I don't need any of this. Please watch his video. I didn't need that on my screen. I don't. But if you want to support my channel, my way more intellectual channel that doesn't have Warhammer YouTuber hentai. I don't do that shit. This is horrible. Anyway, I have shirts. See? Shirts. These are nice shirts. You could have a kid. You could wear them. You could buy it for your kid if they wear adult sizes. It's way easier. There's other shirts, right? I have mugs. There's stickers. You can put the stickers on your laptop and it won't be humiliating and embarrassing. Can you put those? Could you print those pictures and put them on your laptop? I hope not. Password protect that, right? Not safe for children. Anyway, support my channel and support Majorkill's, right? He makes great content. This isn't my way of saying that you shouldn't. But yeah, also check out my second channel. Check out my Instagram. That's all I got. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.